My family forced me into alcoholism from the moment I took my first breath. I intend that literally. My parents are the wildest individuals I have ever known. Starting when I turned 10, their idea of family bonding involved teaching me and my older brother Kyle how to hold our liquor like seasoned adults. Every Friday night was reserved for what my father liked to call training night. We would assemble around the kitchen table while Dad poured shots of tequila and Mom cheered us on, timing how long we could go without wincing. If we gagged or coughed, we had to do push-ups until our arms gave out. The rule was simple. The family that drinks together stays together. It was the same rule their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents had followed. I thought it was utter nonsense, but my older brother Kyle adapted to it like a duck to water. By the time he turned 14, he had become Dad's favorite drinking buddy. They would remain awake until 4 a.m. running beer pong tournaments in our garage, and Mom would brag to her friends about how her son could outdrink grown men. When Kyle started showing up to breakfast with shaking hands, Dad simply laughed and passed him a beer, calling it hair of the dog. The more Kyle drank, the more affection he received. New gaming consoles, concert tickets, even a motorcycle for his 16th birthday. Meanwhile, I became the household's default disappointment. Not because I was failing classes or getting into trouble, but because I was earning straight A's, leading the debate team, working part-time to save for college, and staying completely sober. Mom's favorite saying was, "You know what your problem is? You judge everyone instead of loosening up and having fun." But it was hard to take her seriously when she slurred her words and tripped over the furniture. I did think about calling the authorities, but I was afraid because my best friend Jessica had tried that for her own family. The moment the social worker left, Jessica's father covered her in bruises, so I ruled out Child Protective Services as an option after that. But then came the day that changed everything, Kyle's 18th birthday party. He was doubled over on the porch, joking about the sharp pains in his side that had been bothering him for weeks. Probably just need to build more tolerance, he laughed, his complexion looking slightly yellow beneath the porch light. Dad's response was to bring out a bottle of $200 scotch he had been saving, slapping Kyle on the back. "It's nothing a good drink can't fix." I genuinely thought he was playing a prank. But that was when my mom pulled out her iPhone and started filming the whole scene for his future children. That was when I realized that if I wanted to survive, I had to play along. I became an actress worthy of an Oscar, fake laughing at their drunken stories and pretending to be intoxicated when I was really just pouring wine bottles into houseplants. The saddest part was that it worked. I was finally considered part of the family. Everything shifted when I left for Oregon State. My randomly assigned roommate was in recovery from alcohol addiction. Through her, I discovered an entire world of people who had fun without poisoning themselves. I joined the campus sober support group, studied addiction science, and came to understand that what had unfolded in my house wasn't normal family bonding. It was intergenerational trauma disguised as tradition. For the first time in my life, I felt clear-headed and genuinely content. I even started training for marathons, something I never could have managed while pretending to be hungover every weekend. During winter break of my sophomore year, I did something utterly bold and reckless. I decided to come home for the holidays. I truly believed this might be the moment I could break the cycle, to persuade my family to abandon alcohol once and for all. In the days leading up to it, I did everything possible to ensure it went smoothly. I gathered photos from my sober friends' gatherings, and even picked up alcohol-free beer and non-alcoholic champagne. I kept reminding myself not to get my hopes up, but as I packed my car, I couldn't stop imagining all of us finally getting along like a normal family. The moment I stepped through the door, Dad shoved a beer into my hand. "There's our college party girl." When I politely declined, mentioning I was training for a race, Mom's expression darkened. "Oh, so you're one of those now? Too good for your own family?" The night spiraled from there. When I tried to go to bed early, they followed me to my room with a bottle of tequila. "You're not ruining Christmas by being a self-righteous witch," Mom snarled. What happened next still gives me nightmares. Dad pinned my arms while Mom tried to force the bottle into my mouth. I kept my jaw clenched shut, tears streaming down my face until Dad grabbed my nose to cut off my air. When I finally gasped for breath, Mom poured tequila down my throat. I vomited immediately, and they simply laughed. "She's out of practice." They spent the next hour trying to force more alcohol into me while I fought and screamed. Kyle watched from the doorway, too drunk to help even if he had wanted to. I pretended to pass out, and when they finally left, I used my phone to record them through my cracked door, laughing about breaking me back in. I called 911 from my closet. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the night air beyond my closet door. I watched Mom and Dad freeze mid-laugh, their expressions shifting from amusement to panic. Mom dropped the tequila bottle, and it shattered against the hardwood floor. "Did you hear that?" Mom's voice went from hammered to sharp within seconds. Dad stumbled to the window, yanking back the curtain. Red and blue lights reflected across his face. Someone called the cops. They both turned toward my room. I stayed perfectly motionless, phone clutched in my sweaty palm, praying they would assume I was still passed out. My throat burned from the forced alcohol, and vomit still clung to my shirt. "Check if she's actually unconscious," Dad ordered. "You check," Mom shot back. "This is your fault for pushing too hard." "My fault? You're the one who poured it down her throat." Their argument gave me time to slip out of the closet and position myself on my bed, eyes shut, breathing shallow. Heavy footsteps approached. Dad's hand grabbed my shoulder and shook hard. "She's out cold," he announced. The doorbell rang, followed by authoritative knocking. "Police, open up." Mom scrambled for the air freshener, spraying it frantically around the house while kicking broken glass under the couch. "Kyle, get down here and act normal." I heard Kyle stumble down the stairs, bumping into walls. Through barely open eyes, I watched him grip the banister, his whole body swaying. His skin had that sickly yellow tint, even in the dim hallway light. "Stand up straight," Dad hissed, slapping Kyle's back. "Remember, we were just having a quiet family evening." The knocking intensified. "Police, we need you to open this door." Dad plastered on his salesman's smile and pulled the door open. Two officers stood on our porch, hands resting on their utility belts. "Evening, officers, something wrong?" "We received a 911 call from this address," the taller officer said, peering past Dad into the house. "Report of a disturbance." "Must be a mistake," Dad said smoothly. "We're just having a quiet family night." That's when I made my entrance. I stumbled out of my room, vomit still streaking my Oregon State hoodie, throat raw and burning. The officer's eyes immediately locked onto me. "Miss, are you all right?" the female officer asked, stepping forward. Before I could speak, Mom rushed over, wrapping her arm around me. "Oh, officers, I'm so sorry. Our daughter's been experiencing some mental health issues since she went to college. She's been acting out. She's been unstable for months," Dad added added, his voice dripping with fabricated concern. We've been trying to get her help, but she refuses. Tonight, she had another episode. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The words came out raspy. They forced alcohol down my throat. Mom's grip tightened on my shoulder. See, she invents these stories. We found her drinking alone in her room. We think she's having a breakdown. The officers exchanged glances. The male officer addressed me directly. Miss, we need to speak with everyone separately. Can you come outside with Officer Martinez? As I moved toward the door, Kyle wavered between following me and staying with our parents. His hands shook violently and he kept touching his side where the pain had been bothering him. His loyalty flickered in his bloodshot eyes like a dying light bulb. Outside on the porch, Officer Martinez noticed the vomit on my clothes immediately. What happened tonight? I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. I have video. They held me down and forced tequila into my mouth. Behind us, through the window, I could see Mom gesturing wildly, while Dad spoke with the other officer. She kept pointing at me and shaking her head. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, peered through her blinds next door, probably wondering what chaos the family was generating. Can I see the video? Officer Martinez asked gently. I played the recording. Even through my cracked door, you could clearly hear my parents laughing about breaking me back in. Their voices were slurred but unmistakable. Officer Martinez's expression hardened. We need to see this, she called to her partner. Mom's shriek pierced the night. That's taken completely out of context. She's editing things to make us look bad. Where's your warrant? Dad demanded, his friendly salesman act evaporating. You can't just invade our home and accuse us of things based on our mentally ill daughter's delusions. The male officer noticed Kyle slumped against the wall, his skin waxy and yellow even under the porch light. Sir, is your son all right? He appears to be in medical distress. He has the flu, Mom said quickly. Just the flu. Kyle, tell them you're fine. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at me, then our parents, then back at me. His silence was deafening, but he couldn't bring himself to choose a side. We need paramedics here, Officer Martinez said into her radio. Report of possible alcohol poisoning and a medical emergency. This is ridiculous, Dad said, his voice rising. I golf with Sheriff Patterson every Sunday. This is all a misunderstanding between family members. My daughter's just bitter because we had to cut her off financially. She's always had this holier-than-thou attitude about drinking. While we waited for the paramedics, Mom's fingers flew across her phone. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins. Traitor, how could you do this to your parents? Your mom says you're having a breakdown. Get help. The paramedics arrived and immediately came to examine me. One shined a light down my throat while I explained what had happened. The burning sensation made me wince. Chemical burns consistent with forced alcohol consumption, the paramedic told the officers. She needs to be checked at the hospital. She did it to herself, Mom insisted. She's always been dramatic. Kyle's hand drifted to his side again, a grimace crossing his face. The movement didn't go unnoticed by the medical team. Sir, we should examine you too, the paramedic said to Kyle. He's fine, Dad said firmly. Just the flu. But under the bright porch lights, Kyle's condition was impossible to dismiss. The yellowing of his skin, the trembling hands, the way he kept touching his side, all classic signs the paramedics recognized immediately. How long have you been experiencing abdominal pain? The paramedic asked Kyle directly. Kyle glanced at Dad, then mumbled, Few weeks. It's nothing, Dad said, his tone shifting to casual conversation. Sheriff Patterson and I were just discussing situations like this at poker last week. Families having disagreements that get blown out of proportion. He always says these things are better handled privately. The implication wasn't subtle. Officer Martinez's jaw tightened. Sir, we're going to need everyone to come to the station for formal statements. I'm calling our lawyer, Mom announced. This is harassment. Our daughter is troubled, and instead of getting her psychiatric help, you're enabling her delusions. The officers began collecting evidence. They bagged the broken tequila bottle, photographed my vomit-covered clothing, and documented the scene. Dad watched with clenched fists as they worked, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. My phone continued buzzing. Mom had sent a group message to the entire extended family. Please pray for us. My daughter is having another episode and called the police on us. We're heartbroken. She needs mental help but refuses to accept it. The responses poured in immediately. Uncle Ray, that ungrateful brat. Aunt Susan, after everything you've done for her. Cousin Mark, some kids don't deserve good parents. At the station, we were separated for questioning. I sat in a small room, throat still burning, while Officer Martinez took my statement. Through the window, I spotted a familiar figure rushing through the parking lot. Uncle Tony, Mom's brother. He had been their drinking companion for 3 decades and happened to be a lawyer. My client won't be answering any questions, he announced, bursting into the station as if he owned it. His breath reeked of whiskey. That's when things took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Uncle Tony produced a folder of documents. My clients have been concerned about their daughter's mental health for years. Here's documentation. Officer Martinez flipped through the papers. I caught glimpses of medical forms, all dated years ago. My heart sank as I recognized them. They were from when I was 16 and had refused to drink at Thanksgiving. My parents had taken me to a physician, claiming I was displaying antisocial behavior and paranoid delusions about alcohol. These forms indicate a pattern of mental instability, Uncle Tony said smoothly. My clients have been managing this for years. They pay for her college, her apartment, everything, and this is how she repays them. My phone buzzed with a message from Kyle. Why couldn't you just pretend for one more night? The betrayal stung worse than the alcohol burns in my throat. Even now, even after watching them force liquor down my throat, he still believed I was the problem. Officer Martinez stepped out to consult with her partner. Through the door, I could hear Mom's voice carrying down the hall. She's always been jealous of Kyle. He's successful, popular, knows how to have fun. She's just resentful and wants to tear our family apart. When Martinez returned, her expression was carefully neutral. The video evidence is concerning, but your parents' lawyer is arguing it's taken out of context. Without Kyle's cooperation, it's your word against theirs. What about my throat? The burns. They're claiming you did it to yourself, that you've done things like this before for attention. I thought about Jessica, how her bruises hadn't been enough to keep her safe, how the system had failed her. Now it was failing me too, but in a different way. My parents had learned from families like Jessica's. Don't leave visible marks. Leave psychological ones instead. Create a paper trail that makes the victim look unstable. We'll need to investigate further, Martinez said. In the meantime, do you have somewhere somewhere safe to stay? Safe. The word felt alien. Home had never been safe, but now my parents had ensured no place would be. They had already launched their campaign to turn everyone against me. By morning, I would be the ungrateful daughter who called the cops on her loving parents. The mentally unstable girl who needed help but refused to accept it. My phone lit up with a Facebook notification. Mom had written a public post. Please pray for our family tonight. Our daughter is struggling with mental health issues and addiction. We love her so much but don't know how to help her anymore. She called the police on us tonight after we tried to stop her from drinking alone in her room. Our hearts are breaking. The comments were already flooding in. Family, friends, neighbors, people from their bowling league, all offering prayers and support for my poor parents dealing with such a troubled child. I scrolled through, watching my reputation crumble in real time. Then I spotted something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Davidson, my dad's golf companion who worked at the local news station, had commented, "So sorry to hear this, buddy. Let me know if you need anything." By tomorrow, this would extend far beyond family gossip. Dad was already 3 steps ahead, casting me as the villain of a story where I was the victim. The man who had pinned my arms while Mom poured poison down my throat would be portrayed as a concerned father. The woman who had called me a sanctimonious witch would be painted as a heartbroken mother. The station's fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal as I sat there watching my life unravel through a phone screen. Officer Martinez had stepped out to make copies of my evidence, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the relentless buzz of notifications. Each ping felt like another nail in my coffin. Mom's Facebook post had gone viral throughout our small community, 67 comments and climbing. The bowling league president offered to organize a prayer circle. Dad's golf companions were planning a fundraiser for my treatment. Even my high school English teacher had commented about how she had always sensed something was off. My hand trembled as I scrolled through the messages. Then one made me freeze. It was from Benji, the bartender at my parents' favorite watering hole. "Kyle's been attending AA meetings at the church for 3 months now. Your parents don't know." Before I could process this revelation, Uncle Tony burst back into the room, briefcase in hand. He slapped down a stack of papers thick enough to stun a small animal. "These are your parents' financial records showing they pay your tuition, rent, car insurance, health insurance, even your phone bill. You're completely dependent on them." He pulled out another document. "And this is a withdrawal form already prepared. One signature from them and you're cut off from everything. Is that really what you want?" Officer Martinez returned, glancing between us with barely concealed irritation. "Sir, you can't threaten a witness." "I'm not threatening anyone," Uncle Tony said smoothly. "I'm simply clarifying the family dynamics to help my niece make an informed decision." My phone buzzed. A text from my roommate. "Your mom just friended me on Facebook. She's asking really strange questions about your mental health. What should I do?" The walls felt like they were closing in. Mom was already working her angles, trying to turn my support system against me. I showed the text to Martinez, who made a note but looked increasingly overwhelmed by the family drama unfolding before her. "Look," Uncle Tony leaned forward, his whiskey breath making me gag. "Your parents are willing to forget this entire misunderstanding. They'll even pay for therapy. Real therapy, not whatever experimental nonsense you've been doing at college. All you have to do is acknowledge that you were confused about what happened tonight." "Confused?" My voice cracked. They held me down and forced alcohol down my throat. "You were intoxicated," he said simply. "Memory plays tricks. Maybe you had a few drinks to settle your nerves about coming home. Things got out of hand, and your parents tried to help. These things happen." Officer Martinez's partner knocked and entered. "We need to transport the brother to the hospital. His condition is deteriorating." Through the doorway, I caught a glimpse of Kyle being loaded onto a gurney. His skin had taken on a greenish tinge, and he was clutching his side. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw genuine terror there. Raw, unfiltered fear. "Kyle," I tried to stand, but Uncle Tony stepped in my path. "He'll be fine," he said. "Just needs fluids." The stress of tonight hasn't helped his flu, but I knew better. I had researched liver disease extensively after observing Kyle's symptoms months earlier. The jaundice, the abdominal pain, the tremors. He was in serious trouble. Martinez noticed my distress. "We'll ensure he receives proper medical attention. His liver is failing," I blurted out. "He needs to be evaluated for transplant eligibility. Please tell the doctors to run a full hepatic panel." Uncle Tony's face darkened. "Now you're playing physician. This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior your parents have been managing." My phone rang. Dad's contact photo, him hoisting a beer at last year's 4th of July party, filled the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You happy now?" His voice was ice cold. "Your brother is being taken to the hospital because of the stress you've created. If anything happens to him, it's on you. He's sick because you've been poisoning him since he was 10. We gave him a family tradition, something to belong to. You're the one who rejected us. Who thinks she's better than everyone else?" Mom's voice came through in the background. "Tell her about the diary." My blood went cold. "What diary?" "The one you kept freshman year of high school," Dad said. "Where you wrote about how much you despised us, how you fantasized about running away, how you wished you had different parents. We kept it in case we ever needed to show people who you really are." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, remembering that diary. I had hidden it under my mattress, filled with typical teenage anguish and frustration. Normal things any child writes when forced to watch their parents stumble around drunk every night, but taken out of context. "I need to go," I told Martinez. "My brother needs me at the hospital." "You're free to go," she said. "But I strongly advise against contact with your parents right now." Uncle Tony smirked. "She's right. In fact, I'll be advising my clients to seek a restraining order if you approach them, for their protection." Outside the station, the December air hit my lungs like tiny needles. I sat in my car, heat blasting, trying to determine my next move. My phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. My checking account, which had contained $3,000 that morning, now showed $47.83. The tuition payment for next semester, gone. The rent money I had set aside, transferred out. Even the $500 emergency fund I had tucked into a separate savings account had been drained. Everything except what I had earned from my part-time job, which was held at a different bank. I drove to the hospital in a daze. The emergency room was packed with holiday mishaps. Kitchen burns, decoration-related injuries, and more than a few alcohol-induced incidents. I found Kyle's room after convincing a sympathetic nurse I was his sister. He looked diminished in the hospital bed, IVs running into both arms. The harsh overhead light made his jaundice impossible to ignore. His girlfriend Alexandra sat beside him, her hand protectively over her still flat stomach. "You shouldn't be here," she said without looking up. "Your parents say you're having some kind of breakdown." "Alex, please. You know that's not true." She finally met my eyes, and I could see she had been weeping. anything. Do I? You called the cops on them at Christmas. Kyle's been throwing up blood because of the stress. He's throwing up blood because his liver is failing. The doctor said it's acute gastritis brought on by stress, she countered. Your parents explained everything. How you've been unstable since you started college. How you joined some strange sobriety cult. I wanted to scream. Even here, even with Kyle dying in front of us, my parents' narrative was winning. Benji told me Kyle's been attending AA meetings, I said. Alexandra's face went pale. That's not, he wouldn't. 3 months, I pressed. He's been trying to get sober. Ask him when he wakes up. Get out. Her voice was quiet but firm. Get out before I call security. I left, but not before photographing Kyle's chart hanging on the door. The physician's notes mentioned elevated liver enzymes and possible cirrhosis, recommending further testing. Nothing about gastritis. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and finally allowed myself to cry. Everything was unraveling faster than I could process. My family had turned against me. My finances were decimated. My brother was dying while everyone pretended it was my fault. My phone rang. Jessica. I heard what happened, she said without preamble. Mom saw your mom's Facebook post. Jess, I believe you, she interrupted. I know what it looks like when parents flip the script. But listen, you need to be careful. My dad called your dad after he saw the post. They were on the phone for an hour. My stomach dropped. What did they discuss? I don't know, but I heard my dad mention something about coordinating stories and protecting family traditions. They're planning something. After we hung up, I drove to the only place I could think of, the 24-hour gym where I trained for marathons. Physical exhaustion had always been my method of processing trauma. I ran on the treadmill until my legs screamed, trying to outrun the reality of my circumstances. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from my college roommate. The subject line made my heart sink. I'm worried about you. She forwarded a message from my mom, who had composed a 3-page letter about my deteriorating mental health, complete with fabricated incidents and distorted versions of real events. Mom claimed I had been drinking heavily at school, that I had joined a cult-like sobriety group that encouraged members to cut off their families, that I had become paranoid and delusional. The worst part was how convincing she made it sound. Every lie was wrapped in just enough truth to seem plausible. Yes, I had joined a sober support group, but it wasn't a cult. Yes, I had grown distant from my family, but not because I was unstable. I crafted a measured response to my roommate, including screenshots of my parents' drinking photos from social media, documentation of Kyle's hospital visits, and a link to an article about family alcoholism and gaslighting. But even as I hit send, I wondered if it would be enough. The next morning, I woke in my car in the gym parking lot. My phone had exploded overnight. 17 missed calls from various relatives, 43 text messages, each more accusatory than the last. But one message stood apart. It was from Dr. Chen, the physician who lived next door to my parents. I witnessed what happened last night. If you need a medical professional to verify your injuries, I'm willing to help. Your parents have been a hazard to themselves and others for years. Hope flickered in my chest. Finally, someone who might corroborate my account. I immediately texted back, arranging to meet her at a coffee shop near the hospital. Dr. Chen looked exhausted when she arrived, still in her scrubs from a night shift. I've been debating whether to get involved, she admitted, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. But when I watched them dragging Kyle to the car last month after he collapsed in the driveway, and they refused to let me assist, I couldn't stay silent any longer. She pulled out her phone, showing me videos captured by her security camera, multiple incidents of my parents drunk driving, Kyle being carried into the house unconscious, even a clip of my dad threatening a delivery driver who had commented on his intoxication. I've been cataloging things for 2 years, she said. I kept assuming someone else would report it, but everyone just enables them. The whole neighborhood treats it like some running joke. We spent an hour reviewing her evidence. She had even maintained a log of incidents, dates, and times meticulously recorded. It was damning material, if anyone would listen. The problem, she said, is that your parents have connections everywhere. The sheriff, the mayor, half the city council. They've spent decades cultivating relationships lubricated by alcohol and money. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Benji. Can't use my regular phone. Your parents just arrived at the bar. They're meeting with 5 other families. I heard them mention unified front and protecting our way of life. Be careful. Dr. Chen read the message over my shoulder. 5 families. I knew exactly who she meant. The Johnsons, the Pattersons, the Williamses, the Garcias, and the Thompsons. All families with children Kyle's and my age. All families who had their own training nights. All families with secrets to guard. They're circling the wagons, I said. Dr. Chen's expression was grim. You've threatened more than just your parents. You've threatened an entire culture of normalized alcoholism. My phone rang. Kyle's number. I answered immediately. You need to stop. His voice was weak, raspy. Whatever you're doing, just stop. Kyle, you're in the hospital with liver failure. I'm fine. The doctors overreacted. Mom and Dad explained everything. I've just been stressed about the baby. Kyle, please. Benji told me about the AA meetings. Silence. Ben, I don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. Mom's right. You need help. They've gotten to you. No one's gotten to me. I'm just exhausted by your constant drama. If you genuinely cared about me, you'd apologize and come home. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling as though I had been punched. Even from a hospital bed. Even while dying, Kyle couldn't break free from their grasp. Dr. Chen placed a gentle hand on my arm. Addiction isn't only physical. The psychological chains are frequently stronger. What do I do? Everyone thinks I'm unstable. My own brother won't back me up. You survive, she said simply. You document everything and you wait for the truth to emerge. It always does eventually. But I wasn't certain I could wait. My college fund was gone. My family had turned the entire community against me. And Kyle was deteriorating daily while everyone pretended everything was fine. I spent the rest of that day trying to salvage what I could. My boss at the campus bookstore agreed to give me extra hours when I returned. My academic advisor helped me apply for emergency financial aid. The sober support group launched a GoFundMe that raised $500 in the first hour. But for every step forward, my parents shoved me 2 steps back. Mom called my workplace, informing my manager I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. Dad contacted my professors, expressing concern about my mental health and suggesting I might need a medical leave. The masterstroke came that evening. I was at a budget motel, the only place I could afford with my remaining funds, when police knocked on my door. 2 officers I didn't recognize stood outside. We need you to come with us, the older one said. Your parents have filed for an emergency psychiatric hold. They're worried you might harm yourself or others. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I'm not suicidal. I'm not dangerous. They're lying. Ma'am, we have statements reports from multiple family members and community members expressing concern about your behavior. You called 911 making false accusations. You've been harassing your hospitalized brother, and your parents say you've been issuing threats. None of that was true, but it didn't matter. The paperwork was all in order, signed by a judge who I later learned was in my parents' bowling league. I was handcuffed and placed in the back of the squad car, watching the motel shrink in the rear window. The psychiatric facility was an hour away. During intake, I tried to explain what was genuinely happening, but the more I spoke about my parents forcing alcohol down my throat and the community conspiracy to silence me, the more paranoid I sounded. Have you taken any substances? The intake nurse asked. No, I'm sober. I've been sober for 2 years. Your family says you've been drinking heavily. They're lying, she made a note. Everything I said was distorted. My marathon training became obsessive exercise, behavior. My involvement with the sober support group became cult participation. My documentation of Kyle's illness became fixation and stalking. I was placed in a sterile room with another patient who spent the entire night talking to invisible people. No phone, no way to reach anyone who could verify my story. Just me and the growing certainty that my parents had won this round. The following morning, a psychiatrist interviewed me. Dr. Patel was young, likely fresh out of residency, and actually seemed to listen. I carefully described everything, sticking to facts, avoiding anything that might sound paranoid. Your parents have furnished quite a bit of documentation, he said, reviewing a thick file, including diary entries where you express hostility toward them from when I was 15. Every teenager writes things like that. They also have videos of you pretending to be intoxicated at family gatherings. My heart sank. The Oscar-worthy performances I had delivered to survive were now being used as evidence against me. I was performing so they'd stop pressuring me about not drinking. So you were being dishonest. Every truth I offered sounded like a symptom. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. I was trapped in a web of my family's construction, and the harder I struggled, the more entangled I became. There's someone who can verify my account, I said desperately. Dr. Chen, our neighbor, she has security footage. Dr. Patel made a note. We'll look into that. But I could tell from his expression that he had already reached a conclusion. I was just another patient with family issues, possibly experiencing a breakdown, definitely in need of supervision. The 72-hour hold felt like 72 years. No news from the outside world. No way of knowing whether Kyle was all right, whether my college enrollment was secure, whether anyone was advocating for me. Just group therapy sessions where I had to pretend to acknowledge my issues to avoid appearing uncooperative. On the third day, just as I was beginning to think I would be detained indefinitely, Dr. Patel summoned me to his office. His expression was altered, uncertain, perhaps even troubled. We spoke with Dr. Chen, he said. She provided some compelling footage. We also received calls from several members of your college support group, your academic advisor, and your employer. Their account of events differs considerably from your family's version. Relief washed through me. So you believe me? I believe there's considerably more to this situation than was initially presented. However, your parents remain your medical proxy since you're on their insurance. They're insisting on continued treatment. They can't keep me here if I'm not a danger to myself or others. No, but they can make things difficult. I'm going to recommend discharge, but I strongly suggest you have a plan in place. Somewhere safe to stay, continued therapy, distance from the conflict. He was right. I couldn't return to the motel. My parents knew where I had been staying. I couldn't go to the hospital. They had likely obtained a restraining order by now. I was effectively homeless, broke, and alone, but I was free. Dr. Patel arranged for a social worker to drive me back to town. During the ride, she returned my phone, which had been held during intake. The screen lit up with 3 days' worth of messages.